Did you know what you were doing when you traveled into all 50 states, or was it just kind of something fun to do? Like, did you know how that would shape them as adults? Like, was that intentional, or was it just kind of accidental what you figured out of?
No, it was intentional. Yeah, absolutely, it was intentional. The big thing for us was we always tried to go do outdoor stuff. I mean, we would visit cities and things, but mainly it was about whatever the natural elements were in all the different places. So it was very specific to kind of broaden their horizons. That
Hmm.
was a big thing. Is the more places you go, the more possibilities you see.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home. Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Killoy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Welcome back to the Military Veteran Dad, episode 60. Today in the podcast, we are going to dive into a new, different area that we've never talked about, the kids of America's Fallen. Today's guest, Joe Lewis, he is the organizer and founder of Angels of America's Fallen. It's an organization that focuses on providing one of the simplest things that may be overlooked that can completely change a child's life, especially one where they've lost either a father or a mother. And essentially, what they do is they provide soccer lessons, they provide swim lessons, and the stories that you hear today on this podcast and the impact that Joe is having on this world is nothing less than game changing, because all it takes is for one military child to receive one of these resources and continue to believe that someone out there has their back, that they have a path where they can grow up to be a strong adult. Because military kids already, even if, when they have both parents, they already are wired and built to go out into the world and do amazing things. But when you lose one of your parents, that leaves a scar in your heart. And oftentimes, military kids don't recover from that. Joe focuses on making sure that they have just one little thing to focus on to keep them going, to make sure they have the right mentor in their life, if it's a coach. But man, Joe, I met him back at Military Infantry Conference in last September, and he is just an amazing guy. And now I've got to learn his story of being a dad. It just goes beyond, because what he does is he's essentially been taking all the lessons that took me a year to figure out that makes a great military dad, and he did them already, because his kids are already out of the house and on to doing bigger and better things with their life. And what we talk about today is how travel can really open up a child's life, how adding depth to their world can really give them an idea of how they can fit into this world. And at the end, we talk about a statistic of what it takes to make this organization run. And essentially, right now, there are 500 kids without a parent, that are missing a parent, that are on his waiting list. And Joe has committed to take them from the moment they are accepted to the year of 18 to fund them with a scholarship every year to do an activity. So this takes a lot of money. It takes almost $15,000 per child to be able to say yes. And right now, those 500 kids, to take those 500 kids and grant them the wish of a swim lessons, a soccer practice, whatever that child may need in their life, that requires almost $8 million. That $8 million would change 500 kids' lives. And just think of the impact that that money will have on a child's life when they go out into the world and start changing it. And I am humbled that he came into my life, but then also more excited that I can't wait to the day that I can write a check that is a completely different, that completely funds one of these kids' lives. Because if I could write an $8 million check right now, I would, because that's how good of a man Joe is. And that's how much this organization really hit me on the context of being a military dad, but then also in the context of what happens when dads don't come home, or maybe they came home and they didn't get the services that they need, and maybe they took their own life. It doesn't matter. These kids need help. And it can be as simple as $10, anything that will help this mission and this mission grow. And in the show notes, there is a donate link. So if you like his message, if you like the organization, go ahead, click the donate button and donate some money, because that money will go to a child that can literally just need swim lessons or soccer practice or some positive influence in their life. And your little donation can make that big difference for him. So without further ado, let's get started with Joe Lewis. Welcome to the show tonight, Joe.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am super excited for this. And we first met each other at Military Influencer Conference, Washington, D.C. last September. And I feel like we talked for an hour and a half there as we were both sharing stories and you were tearing up my heart. Go ahead and unpack for the audience a little bit about your story as being a military dad before we go into the stuff that was getting me tore up.
Okay. Actually, it starts with my dad being a Marine, Vietnam era Marine, and he had PTSD from that. We didn't, call it that, but childhood growing up with that. And then I joined the Army National Guard right out of high school and turned 18 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Did that through college, then the Marine Corps for 11 years until I broke my back, and then got out of the Marine Corps and went to the airlines and did that until 9/11 occurred, and then went back active duty and active with the Air National Guard doing counter narcotics, reconnaissance, and counter narco terrorism, and had my sons right before I got out of the Marine Corps. So I had, obviously amount of time away, I really wanted to be there and see my sons, and had plenty of friends that, missed the childbirth on deployments and things like that. And so I kind of waited a little bit later to have, and ended up with two boys, and my wife and I, moving all over the place and dragging the kids with us actually worked out extremely well. Just because we covered a lot of ground with them, and my boys are 20 and 19, and they've been to all 50 states, and that's kind of the story, I guess.
Did you know what you were doing when you traveled them to all 50 states, or was it just kind of something fun to do? Like, did you know how that would shape them as adults? Like, was that intentional, or was it just kind of accidental what you figured out?
No, it was intentional. Yeah, absolutely. It was intentional. The big thing for us was we always tried to go do outdoor stuff. I mean, we would visit cities and things, but mainly it was about whatever the natural elements were in all the different places. So it was very specific to kind of broaden their horizons. That was a big thing, is the more places you go, the more possibilities you see. And I wanted them to have that.
And I think this is something you hit. I'm glad you hit it right there, because this is one of the biggest assets military dads bring to the table, that being only less than 1% of the population that's in the military, we have a perspective and a depth to the world that very few people have. And being able to gift that gift of depth of the world, of knowing different ways of living to your kids. I mean, the amount of just strength and confidence they get because they've seen so much of the world that they don't have a lot of questions of who they are, because they've got to see so many different ways they can choose to live. Absolutely. Did you see that with your kids when they were figuring out what they wanted to do when they grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a weird thing because, on one side, there's a piece of the identity that's a little bit missing because where are you from? And they're from all over. But at the same time, that makes them a more strong individual, and they've got friends from all over. So they're not defined by one geographic location that maybe they started from or were at, a particular long time. And I think that's opened up things for them, because even just in their mindset about traveling and going out on their own, where they don't think a 13-hour drive is long, for a lot of people, a 2-hour drive is long. And so that kind of thing has led to a lot of independence for them. So in fact, he's 20 now, but when he was 17, he was trying to get some of his high school buddies to go camping with him about 8 hours away. And the other kids' parents were freaking out about it. And we had to have a parent meeting to talk about it. And Michael, he had to lay out the loading plan and basically sell the whole trip to him, which was a confidence builder thing, but it was also a leadership role. And it gave him a sense of adventure. And he filmed and documented while he was doing these trips, which has turned into his passion and what he's pursuing right now. He's going to Full Sail University for digital film, and it's his thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat.
I mean, I can only imagine, like, when your son became a voice in an empty room of people that really didn't know how to add fire and spice to their life. And now he kind of walks in and storms the doors open and be like, dude, we can go out there and conquer the world and camp and sleep under the stars. And I could easily pick up what your son seems, not necessarily like in a bad way, but like there isn't a lot of like fear holding back from saying yes to something or doing something courageous, because his whole life has been written in the page of doing courageous and not crazy, because he wouldn't have known it was crazy or out of the box at the time. But now it's just part of his default programming to keep taking action on things.
It is. And that's really neat to see. And in fact, some of the other parents, one of the things they were really concerned about, well, how much food are you taking, and what about jackets and all this stuff. I was like, if they're cold and hungry for 3 days, that's a great learning experience. So they'll live through it. It's not that big a deal, and it was pretty cool.
And it's a testament of what regular parents are missing out on as well, because you have to let your kids live. And I often say what you did was you have to get your kids outside of their life so they can see how they fit into life. And you can't do that in 12 years of school. And that's what most parents do. And then they wonder why they rubber band back to their basement, because they don't have an identity. And there's only one version of life they've understood. And it's one that's extremely confusing. They don't feel they belong to.
Yeah. I like that saying. That's pretty neat.
So I commend you for figuring that out and getting your kids out there. Did you do any international traveling?
Yeah, we have. We've been to Mexico. We went to Belize.
Belize! I bet that would have been an amazing experience for the kids.
That was fantastic. That was just amazing, and it was a local thing. It was, again, the perspective part of it. One, it's cheaper to not go to the fancy places, so it was a more rustic thing, and it was more with the locals, with the local food, and you're seeing where the people live, not just the expensive hotel row. And they made,
or see even what real poverty looks like. I mean, that's something that I think most kids need to know.
Absolutely, yeah. And so they'd see and made friends with some of these guys that they didn't have a football, and my kids took a football down there with them and gave it to them, and then they do have internet and all that other kind of good stuff. So they actually had got friends they still stay in touch with from Belize. So that's kind of a neat thing.
And when you think about, like, I've always thought, like, explained it in India, like to walk up to someone that absolutely has nothing around them and see a smile on their face, that's a lesson that every American needs to learn 5 times and twice on Sunday, because it's not the iPhone, it's not the Apple Watch, it's not your Instagram followers that generate your happiness. You really need to figure out where it comes from, and it comes from the inside. And that's what you get to see when you go to those places, because those kids without the football, they were just as happy with it. And now they're in ecstasy because you gave them a football, but they had nothing before and they had a smile on their face.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. That did stick out to them. And my oldest in particular talked about that. And he also went and did a mission trip to Peru, and he loved it because everybody was happy without having all the things, and they were more friendly. And it's just funny. Sometimes the more you have, the more you sweat the small stuff. And that's what we tend to do here. A lot of people do. So it's really neat.
And that partially comes from most Americans, I think, live in a fear world, because of, if you tune into the news and the newspapers or really anywhere, you can be quickly surrounded with a world that seems scary as hell. But when you start traveling the world, especially the military, you realize it's all really just smoke and mirrors that people try to sell you on. And the world is actually really safe. Even like crazy places that people would be scared to travel, like Israel. Israel is a fairly safe place to travel to. But if you look at the news, it says the opposite. And Americans just have this fear of letting go and like going into the world that then they pass on to their kids. And then it's just like kind of passing on your anxiety trap. And I just really commend you because I can't wait to hear someday when we run into each other of what kind of things your sons have done and how they've changed the world, and how the dent of Lewis on the wall of the universe is getting deeper as they go out there and change the world from their own perspective.
Yeah, that's a great thought.
Yeah. I always like to describe it as the universe of the wall, and then like your last name is the dent, and someone walks by and be like, that was the Lewis's.
That's pretty cool. I like that. What I didn't mention about it in our story is when I retired from the military, we got in an RV and drove around for a year. I had not spent the amount of time I wanted to spend with my kids. And even prior to that, while I was in, I had Lyme disease, and it had gotten very advanced. It was about 3.5 years, and 18 different doctors missed the diagnosis. So it was becoming really, really debilitating. And we spent a year. It was a lifetime of vacations that I spent with my 2 boys and dog and my wife in a 30-foot RV driving around the country. And throughout that whole time, we never had a negative experience with anybody in an RV park or a Walmart parking lot, sometimes, where we would stop. And that was a great perspective thing too. And it reduced the amount of things we had. We had bikes and stuff like that we drug along with us, but we certainly didn't have the majority of the things that fill, a normal house. And it was just fine.
And the kids survived.
Oh yeah.
Despite anybody else's prediction. And that's one of the things that's kind of interesting, as this past year, I've really the last 2 years, I would say I've really become addicted to talking to strangers versus like being afraid of people. And there is a fear, but once you start leaning into it, it's like the world is really generous and people are really generally great human beings. We just kind of forget how to interact with each other, even that we could interact with each other. And we get so caught up in patterns that we actually don't realize that we can actually pause and just enjoy a 2-minute conversation with someone randomly. And maybe that makes someone's day. Like you never know what it takes to put someone's pants on that day. And all of that is just kind of missed out on. I'd like to actually go back and rewind because there's a part that I think we're missing here. What did you think your dad gave you from his parenting that kind of helped you see that this is the way that you wanted to raise your kids? Because I can't imagine you just woke up one day and realized that this was the way we're going to lead into the world.
No, actually, yeah, some of those same benefits that you talked about for kids of military kids, I got right off the bat as well. So I'd lived in multiple locations, and my dad had he was a big guy, and he had some tough issues again with the PTSD. So it was tough living with him, but at the same time, he was also very loving,
Mm-hmm.
and so I looked at the way he raised me, and also he was more worldly. We had, at this point, when he had gotten out, we had gone back to a small town, and the exposure that I had and that he continued to give me from his experiences from traveling all around, I think really broadened my horizons as
So he was a
well.
good
So
storyteller.
he was, yeah, he was. And also he would bring into just our conversation different words. Part of his vocabulary was built from his experiences being, living in Japan for a while and time in Vietnam and different language and different things. And he was intentional about spending time with me. And as much as I sometimes didn't like it, dragging me into helping him with projects as well, which really built my skill set and my independence as well. So those were some of the things that I knew that I wanted to pass along to my sons.
You just hit on, you were like the perfect military dad. I'm just going to claim it out there right now because you hit
Far
on,
from.
and your dad knew what he was doing, that a lot of the current people suffering with PTSD are missing out on. That I describe it as like everything that happens in your life is like 1,000-piece Snap-on toolbox. And there's so many specialty wrenches that you actually don't know what they're for. It's like that nut on a car you can't find until you working on it. You're like, damn, that's what that wrench was for. Your dad figured out how to use all of those things, bad and good, to help shape you and to give you the resources to go with your life. And he used his own life as a vehicle and his own experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, to help do it. And that's what so many of military dads today leave on the table is we have as perspective to give to our kids of all the things that we did and to help them just understand their world from our world. Like when you're less than 1% of the population and you have an opinion that is generally greater and that message that everyone needs to hear, you can create some amazing adults and you're already doing it. So like you're just continuing on the lineage of creating better and better adults as we have more kids.
He didn't mention it in these terms, but I think this was in his mind. There's a saying, "Don't waste the pain,"
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's important because part of what he taught me was that life isn't fair. And I think maybe compared to what a lot of kids are getting today, thinking that life is supposed to be fair.
Yeah, that there's
And
a world where this pain is removed, like that you don't ever
yeah,
get bruised.
right. And so then when they bump into something, they think that it's only happening to them, and it sends them, down a track that's not healthy. Versus realizing that, yeah, life is tough. It's tougher other places. We're really fortunate to be here in the United States and to have what we have.
When they get
And
bit by a
so,
mosquito on an 8-hour trip away from home, and it's the first time they've ever been bit by a mosquito without mom there to put some ointment on it.
yeah, that's exactly, yeah. A little suck it up kind of a thing is an important lesson for everybody to learn, right?
Yeah. I forgot bug spray. Mom's always got the bug spray. Oh, I probably need to be an adult and remember it on my own.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
What do you think helped your dad figure that out? Because it wasn't necessarily popular programming back then, or even like very few veterans even tell the stories of their service. Like it's usually something that's locked away and then never brought back up.
I think it was that being with us was his coping strategy. It wasn't.
Ah, beautiful. Just
Yeah.
beautiful.
I mean, he spent his time with us as opposed to pursuing other things, and he wanted, and it's that I definitely have from him. I would rather spend time with my family and be here than out with buddies, doing whatever. And so, the quality time certainly didn't call it quality time back then, but that's what we got.
Yeah, I just condone more that you guys are the perfect military family. Of all the things that I've realized that military dads are doing, you guys are executing on all cylinders. Because what you just brought up there is the biggest thing that I've learned in 55 episodes is that military members never switch from the legacy of their service to legacy of their family. And your dad did it beautifully. He quickly realized that the one thing that's going to live past my life is my kids. And the love that I can receive from them and give them is pure, and I can do something with everything that I've got. And I just updated my logo for the 2020, and I added at the bottom, our family is our legacy, because that is the biggest tool that any military dad can use to reshift their entire purpose and to find a new reason to live, and to not figure out that their family's better without them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important part. That is so much a piece of the suicide issue. Is some guys they think they're doing their family a favor by removing themselves, and absolutely the farthest thing from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's still got good in them that can be shared.
And the other part that people like, it's kind of comes from the civilian side as well, because there's a stigma of fear. Like, some people will fear veterans because they're not sure if they're stable or not. There's the label of, oh, these guys are broken, we really don't know what to do with them. And that just makes it worse. Like, the worst thing you can do to a veteran is give them a label, because then that just makes them feel defeated and makes them almost feel like a piece of garbage, that they didn't actually earn anything, and that they just kind of stripped their service away from them. But all of that pain, like, I always like the analogy, when you break a bone, the bone heals 2 times stronger than it did before the break. And even a scab on a scar tissue on your arm is even a stronger piece of skin than it was before. So, like, all of that just really makes you stronger. And when you come through the pain on the other side with love for others outside of that, for your family, like, man, you can just do so much. So I commend you. You win my military dad of the year. I haven't said that, but man, you guys are rocking it.
Well, it's early January, so it's early of the new year.
We'll declare. We were supposed to record this in November, so we'll declare for 2019.
Okay, but absolutely everything you were saying is correct. But that's not to say that it's easy, to heal from your broken bone and whatever, and that kind of stuff. And you have to take care of it, and you have to, be smart about it. But absolutely, yeah, you can come out stronger.
Let's test you on one other area that supports being military dad and coming through this. How has been your network of friends on the other side of transition?
Actually, it's been pretty good. So, they're distant. I moved to a place where I had never been stationed and had no family or friends. We just stopped at a place that we found along the RV trip and thought was a good place. So it's more distant connections, but it's also a big military town. So I have a lot of new connections as well.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, your dad probably gifted you the ability to talk to people, because that's something that veterans suck at, and most people suck at in general. But your ability to do what you do now and to talk to people, like, that's the other key pillar of being a military dad. You can't do it alone. You can't lift everything that life gives you. And some of the stuff is really hurtful, but that's why you need a tribe. Like, for 100,000 years on this earth, men did life in tribes, and that's why we love the military, because it is a tribe, and then it's taken away like a light switch, and we don't have the skills or even the awareness that that's what we really need to recreate again.
Yeah, and I think one of those things I mentioned a little bit, that my dad and his vocabulary and how he brought in parts of where he had been into our conversations. He actually talked to me and my 2 sisters more like we were adults. Or he would include us in discussions and things instead of, oh, you're a kid, this isn't your thing right now, or whatever.
Awesome.
So I think that helped a lot with the communication piece for me.
Mm-hmm. And I've always said that your job isn't to raise good kids. Your job is to raise good adults. And it's a perfect, everything we do in life is to prepare them to leave the house on their own, because it should be a certainty and it should be successful. I've heard it kind of jokingly said that you spend the first 2 years doing everything for them, and you spend the next 16 years unwiring it.
That's good. Yeah. Except for, unfortunately, a lot of people spend
a lot longer than
doing everything for them. Yeah.
A lot longer than that. Because when you see like what, you ever watch like MasterChef Junior and stuff like that, and see what those kids can do and cook and do like amazing, like Gordon Ramsay
episode of that. Yeah.
Like, if you really create a kid that taps into everything who they are and who they're becoming, I mean, what a kid can do at a lot younger age than we give them credit for is absolutely amazing. Like my daughter is 7 and she's going on 16. Like she puts things together and she does math in her head better than I can. And she's 7. So like, I think so it's something happened within the last 20 years that we just kind of were afraid to let our kids kind of grow up. Maybe it's just like the sadness of it, but at the same time, or the reality of it, I'm not exactly sure where it all went wrong. But there's something about just like letting your kids be adults. I've even heard like start making your kids sign contracts when they start becoming a teenager for different things. Like if they want to do something or if they want a cell phone, make them sign a contract like you had to do when you got your phone from the AT&T. Like they should have to sign a contract and get used to signing a contract and agreeing to certain things. Like these are things that we can teach them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
So they don't just run into it when they try to get a new cell phone. Like I don't never sign a contract when my parents gave it to me.
Yeah.
And they can be crying back and wanting you to get on your, can I get on your plane?
Mm-hmm.
So let's fast forward a little bit. What's in between the gap of when your kids started to leave and you probably got a little bit bored, you and your wife, and to where you are now, where you have the nonprofit Angels of America's Fallen? How did that all get started?
So that was based on my experience in the military, losing friends in every branch. And it was always a great guy with little bitty kids. 2 of my buddies in the Marine Corps had kids on the way that they never got to meet. And so what I saw was that when we would support the families before they typically moved away, was that things generally would go towards, helping the widow, which is absolutely necessary. And, they're in this fog of loss. But if there was any attention paid to the kids, typically it was thoughts of scholarship. And that's awesome. However, when I look at these little bitty kids, it's like, well, that's, 15, 16,
it's like giving a trust fund
18 years away.
24.
Yeah. So, and I had a really good friend, next door neighbor, going through flight school. And he had, I mentioned that I didn't have kids until later. And so I would always play with his little boy, who was about 18 months or so, around that time frame. And when the father was killed in a crash, the mom kind of dealt with that in part by just blocking that part of her past. And so lost touch with her. And I kept wondering, well, how's Nicholas doing? Who's encouraging him? Who's throwing the ball for him? Greg was such a good guy. He's missing out on that dad component. And he's got to spend his whole most crucial formative childhood years without the mentoring and guidance of his father. And so I looked into, well, what do we provide for kids of our fallen? So I could find initial grief counseling. And then I could find a little bit of, some short things, like there's some summer camps available, or a trip to Disney for 4 or 5 days. But really, it was just a wide open, their whole childhood, the most crucial formative years again, without much of any support. And what I thought was, well, let's make sure that they're not spending their after school time, their idle time, becoming withdrawn and depressed, or running with the wrong crowd and making bad decisions, because today it's much easier to fall off the tracks and not be able to recover than it was when I was a kid. And so we thought, well, what's been helpful to kids, even in the best of circumstances, still, being on a team or pursuing guitar or whatever, sports, music, arts, something with a coach or an instructor, that, the kids put their time into something that they're investing in practice in themselves, and they're gaining from that. And then they've got the mentoring and guidance of a coach or an instructor. So I thought, well, I believe I found a gap in what we're providing for kids of our fallen. And I think I know something that would be impactful. So if I found it, I guess I'm the guy that's supposed to fill it. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start this nonprofit. And I had gotten some numbers before I retired. I was leaning into what am I going to do next? And I was at my son's soccer games, and they're a year and a half apart. They were both on different teams, and they both won the championships that day. And both of the kids, had like really good games. And afterwards we went to Dairy Queen, and I was sitting there and thinking, I just saw how much pride and self-confidence my kids have through their participation in this. That's what I want to be able to provide. So that's how the idea was born. And we formed Angels of America's Fallen in 2012, started helping some local kids as I was waiting on the IRS for the 501c3, and was really, that was a powerful thing for me, because I had lost friends, but I had never really spoken and interacted with a family I didn't know, and talked to them about their loss and what can I do to help and that kind of thing. And to have the conversation with somebody later, after the dust had settled, after, everything had stopped as far as support goes. And now that's when the reality of, oh, I'm in this alone, really hits the mom. And I say mom, we have a couple of dads in our program that lost their wives, but the majority are moms who have lost their husband. So yeah, we started this, and the idea was that these kids are all over the place. And frequently, especially the military families, they tend to move a couple of times trying to find a place that feels like home, because if you do the default, go back to where the mom's from, when you go back to your hometown, a lot of times you realize that it's changed a lot. It doesn't feel the same. And if it's not near a military community, you may have nobody that understands what you're going through at all.
Mm-hmm.
You also have an issue where sometimes if the system works and they get the insurance and they get the dependents indemnity compensation, sometimes family members see that like they just won the lottery, and people come out of the woodworks trying to get a slice of the money.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of issues for that. But what we looked at was, if we cover the cost of these activities that already exist in their communities, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not creating these things. We're just enabling and empowering the kids to do what's already in their community. And if they happen to be from, I don't know, Samoa or whatever, and outrigger canoeing is what's the big thing there, well, then we can support that there and cover their lessons or cover their supplies. And more so than just writing the check, really, this needs to be a relationship thing. This needs to be an encouragement. This needs to be a long-term thing. If we find a child, and obviously in most cases, the breadwinner is the one that's passed.
Mm-hmm.
So that family's never going to recover from the financial loss. The insurance certainly doesn't last that long. And what they receive from the government, if everything works right, is not a lot more than the poverty level on a monthly basis. So if we encourage them to find a passion and get them in it, and then we say, well, good luck, reapply next year, and they don't get selected, then they've just lost another important part of their life, a part of themselves.
They start getting some hope, and they start feeling some momentum, and then the rug's pulled out from under them again.
Yeah. So what we decided was, then we've got to commit, and it's got to be, once they're enrolled, we're with them all the way through 18 without them having to reapply. That's what keeps me up at night, actually, is that I've made this long-term commitment to a bunch of kids, and I can only honor it if, out of the goodness of their hearts, people donate. So it's kind of out of my control to manage that to some degree. That's just a reality thing. It's a different model for a nonprofit to do that versus giving out whatever you brought in that year. And if you brought in less, you just give out less. Well, That's a failure for us.
How close are you in Colorado to Columbine?
About an hour south.
I heard an amazing. So I was maybe like a year ago, I dove into an idea called heart-centered leadership. And it's essentially kind of like how Southwest Airlines runs their business. They kind of focus on the people, kind of a methodology, but they call it heart-centered leadership, or leading with your heart. And he was telling stories. It was about it was stories of how to travel at 13 inches from your head to your heart. And one of them, which I never knew, and is probably the most unpublicized story that needs to be told, the principal of Columbine High School, after that massacre happened in the 90s, he committed the next 20 years to ensure that every kid that was in the school system when that happened got through. And so he didn't quit. And I think he wouldn't even pass the kindergartners that were involved. But he essentially created a culture in that school of no child left behind. They actually they do these links exercises when the school starts, that without this chain being connected, we are no longer a solid chain. And so it's more about like leave no kid behind in school. And he completely transformed the culture at Columbine from what that tragedy. But he committed to make sure every kid got through, kind of like you're committing without really any knowing where it's going to go to make sure every kid gets through. And it just reminded me of this story about Columbine and his commitment to completely revolutionize of how that culture happened, that create the massive. But again, it's like that was massive pain, and he was able to grow a beautiful flower from it.
Yeah. That's one of the things. We honor the loss and the sacrifice, and it's a part of the child's story. It can't be removed. And to do so would be dishonoring their parent as well.
Yep.
So we do that. We honor that, but we focus on positives and possibilities. That's something I say all the time, is that we honor the loss and sacrifice, but focus on positives and possibilities. So yeah, there is, I think there's a greater power in overcoming evil with good than there is in avoiding evil, So, and you can't avoid it anyway.
Yeah. It's going to always be there. You just always have to believe in the good and continue to work through the pain, because the pain may seem like evil, but that's actually the vehicle to create good in the world. And you're going through a big pile of someone's pain, emotions, and life. and trying to come out on the other side with something beautiful. And when I first met you, you had some stories of those kids on the table. Those were just touching of like, you're talking about continuing the legacy past the dad and making sure that there's always someone there kind of looking over them and making sure that their legacy continues to live on. There's an idea that I think it was after we met that I put together, that a lot of dads get caught up on the questions, why did I live and others died? And so you're on the other side, but then there's other dads that are present, or not present, but they are home. They made it back. Their kids are right there. This is something your dad recognized, that I've really woken up to the idea that when you think of it as your legacy, you really you need to create a defining moment. If you lost someone overseas, and we all lost someone because they're all brothers and sisters that are no longer coming home, that there's a child out there that no longer feels their father's love, and there's a father that no longer gets to feel their children's love. And it's up to us that are still back here, that are living life, that can feel that love, to create the best freaking life that you can imagine, and to create a life worthy of the sacrifice that those dads give us. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're turning it around and going back and filling in the gaps, and you have an amazing life and amazing kids, and you're now going back to make sure that other kids don't get left behind a little bit.
Yeah, that was a part of my thought process, was that I am extremely fortunate. I'm blessed to be here with my sons, and there are others that didn't get that opportunity. And then from my kids' perspective, I am trying to be that positive piece, and when the other guys don't have that opportunity. So yeah, I believe that as a nation, we really owe it to these kids to do that, because they lost their parent in service to our country and our communities, right? So I can't imagine anybody wouldn't agree that these kids deserve to have as good of a life, not a spoiled life, right? I'm certainly not talking about that, but they deserve to have the same opportunities and the same outlets that they would have had if their dad would have been there, at least as, if they don't have the ability to get in sports, or pursue something, then we should enable that.
And if it was the dad that died, the mom is most likely, the heart isn't necessarily wired in that moment to continue loving in the way that it used to. You're also a conduit to remind those kids that they are loved.
Oh yeah. That a big piece of this, especially if mom or dad was killed by a bad guy, is that the world isn't full of bad guys, and we make it very clear to them. I send them all a letter when they first are enrolled and talk about this. We're not doing this just because we feel sorry because your mom or dad died. We do this because we care about you, and there are good people that care about you that are donating so you can enjoy, your passion in something healthy. So that's an important, very important piece.
I don't know how much you watch Netflix, but have you ever heard of the Netflix movie, The Christmas Chronicles? It came out last year as a Netflix original. You'd like it because in it, the son's dad dies in a fire. He's a firefighter and he dies trying to save someone. And the son becomes kind of a troublemaker. He gets in a bunch of trouble. And without ruining the movie, they involve Santa and they kind of almost mess up Christmas. But in order to save Christmas, his dad gave him a knife. And on it says, "A Pierce always sees it through." And he kept holding this knife, the son, throughout the movie. It's kind of just this thing he kept feeling sad about and just missing his dad and angry that his dad died for people that didn't even know him. And then they're the ones left without him. And Santa gifts him the idea at the very end to save Christmas, that he had everything inside himself to believe that he needed to save Christmas. And he steps in and saves Christmas just by kind of remembering that a Pierce always sees it through. And it's something that I realized in December, like I did a blog post on it, like, and that's what you're gifting in this idea as well. You're gifting the belief that they have everything inside already. And as military dads, that's what you've already done with your kids. We need to make sure our kids have the gift of believing that everything they need to feel loved and successful in life is already inside them, that there's no external factor needed. And that's what Santa did in that movie. And that's what I've been kind of preaching a little bit more about, that that's the best thing we can do for our kids, is give them the belief. And after they're gone, dad's gone, you give them that gift with that confidence in that program, because they'll learn that they have the things inside them already without dad to be able to become successful. And that belief is what you can be the difference between someone that ends up on the streets and someone that ends up in a coffin from a drug overdose, or someone goes out and changes the world.
Yeah, I think it can. You mentioned something too about the mom's heart not being able to love like it could before. Also, there's some other issues that happen with it when the child is all they've got left, especially if it's one child and that's all they've got left of their family. It's all they've got left of their husband. A part of their husband is in their child, kind of thing. And so some of them are extremely fearful of letting them out of their sight, and letting them do things. And so getting the kids engaged in the activities, actually, I've had that discussion with a couple of the moms, that it's a very healing thing for them as well. And part of this is they vet where their kids are going to go. So when it's not like we say, okay, we can provide your kids soccer at this place. What we do is we talk to the mom and have them speak with the kid and find out what the child might want to do. And sometimes they haven't had the conversation because they don't have the means, or mom's still been treading water. Mm-hmm. And then when they do that and the kid picks something, then the mom vets where they can get back and forth to in town, which place, which piano instructor, or soccer league, or whatever they want the child to do. So then we get the information and contact the activity provider and make the payment directly to them. So there's no barrier. We try to make this very easy on a busy single parent, because if they can't process it, the child loses. So so we kind of try to take a burden off of them and do this and get them into the thing. But it's a place that the mom has picked to be safe, that they feel comfortable with their child going to, and they know where they are for a certain amount of time. It allows them to go and do errands and those kinds of things. But there's a part of loving without smothering, mm-hmm. that's an important piece too. So we've kind of seen that some of our families go through that. There's all kinds of angles to this that I had no idea to expect when we started this, that we've really, really seen. And one of the coolest things is because we make that long-term commitment, and it's not just we're not a check writing service. This is a follow-up and see how they're doing. In fact, we even tell the moms, there will be a time, especially with the ones with the little kids, they don't know it yet, but there'll be a time when the kids don't want to hear from mom. And, they may be depressed and withdrawn, and they don't want to go to school, and they don't want to talk to mom. But if they love soccer, they want to go to soccer practice, and it gets them moving. So, inertia and just getting out of the house and getting involved in something is an important piece of it. And that when it comes time that the child doesn't want to hear something, and let's say they are in soccer, but now soccer season's over and they're just laying around and on a downward spiral, then they can use us instead of mom nagging, hey, why don't you get out and do something? It's like, no, hey, Angels is calling and Shelly wants to know, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do between now and next soccer season? And we tell mm-hmm. them flat out, use us as a prod if needed to, tough love a little bit, but it's about, hey, you need to get out and do something. We want to see you in something.
And I like what you said there, because I'm an emotional person. And so when I feel overwhelmed and just standing still, my mind just builds this fog around my head, and I can't actually see any which way. And I just feel lost. I feel alone. And the craziest thing happens is when you start moving towards any direction, it doesn't really matter. The fog starts to lift like it's magic. And that's what you're talking about. You're just getting them moving, and then somehow motion creates clarity, but just standing still, the world just feels so empty and alone, especially when you have a scar in your heart that continues to feel pain almost every time it beats. Like, that's going to be there as a reminder every time. So having these tools taught to them early on of how to work through this is, I've had, there's stories that I've heard that the kid's dad killed himself at like 10 and he's 35 and he's like, I'm still dealing with it. So the scar never really goes away. They really have to work through that pain. And you're giving them the best vehicle, which everybody knows, fitness and all this stuff. That's the best way to change your chemistry quickly, mentally, even just to get your brain producing different emotions and dopamine. I mean, that's you're almost kind of like biohacking them for success into a future that they don't even really realize is there yet.
That's a big thing. We think about that and talk about that sometimes, that hole is always going to be there for the rest of their life. They're going to have a hole that only dad could fill, right? Mm-hmm. But they can deal with it. They're better equipped to deal with it as adults than they are as kids. So these are the crucial years. Let's not wait until that was one of the things about the scholarships. That's a fantastic thing, and it all works together. But I really feel that it's an important piece to help them and equip them with some skills and distractions. This isn't a grief-based thing. This is about positives and them developing who they are. And it is an identity level thing. They're not just a kid of a fallen hero. And sometimes that's a huge thing to live under the shadow of that, right? Or unfortunately, in some other cases, there was a real negative spiral before dad committed suicide. And that's got its own set of issues. And some of these suicides are in front of the kids or in the home. So there can be a lot of baggage. And and a lot of reminders. You talked about, I don't know the wording that you were just using, but basically there are a lot of triggers that will remind them of this. Everything from birthdays, anniversaries, seeing another, parent, father and son doing something together, seeing a video of a guy coming home and surprising his kids, all these kinds of things. What we've learned is that the kids don't just get a new normal. The dust doesn't settle and there's a new normal and things are okay. They continue to revisit the loss throughout their whole childhood at different levels of maturity as it impacts them differently. So, like a 3-year-old doesn't understand that death is permanent, but around 5, it hits them in a whole different, harder level, and so on throughout their whole childhood. And a lot of times with the girls, we'll see around 16 or so, a lot of them have a really tough time as they think more about graduating high school and then dad's not going to be there to see them do that, or see them walk down the aisle or walk them down the aisle at their wedding and so on. And so there's dips that occur. So it's not, hey, everybody's going to be happy afterwards. It's no, we need to be committed to stick with them throughout these tough times and celebrate their good times, right? Yep. Which is one of the other awesome things about this, is because it is a connection model. Even the distant kids, the local ones, I've been to a lot of their performances and different things, so I see it very directly. But our distant ones, they send us updates and videos and pictures and things. And so we see when a little girl is the whole gymnastic meet champion and stuff like that. Or, you don't have to be a champion to have done well with this, right? It's not about hey, you got a soccer scholarship because you played soccer. It's you pursued something and you grew within that. So, if we get a video of a little bit of ukulele lessons right at the beginning, and then later they're a whole lot better, we get to see that growth. It's kind of cool. It's like having a bunch of grandkids almost.
Yeah. And there was a lot to unpack there. But as you were talking about the sports, it kind of hit me that the one thing that you're also equipping with, all of these events have one thing in common. There is someone that's leading these kids, and yes, generally they're a male person. I mean, they could be a female, but there's still some other figure to kind of shepherd them through. And that's what a lot of coaches are a lot of times, is a father in a lot of cases. And you're still giving them some influence to be able to carry on through their life.
Yeah, that's an important part of it. In fact, that's one of the things what do we say yes to? We want to be flexible and say yes to the child's passion. So as long as it's healthy and it's got a coach or an instructor component, we want to say yes to that. So we've done baking lessons and, horseback riding and all kinds of different things. But yeah, there is that other component, and it's an additional potential mentor. We can't guarantee that they're going to become that connected. Yeah. But we do provide the coach or instructor with some guidance that was developed by some counselors and some of our widows. It's just some basic do's and don'ts. Really, the biggest thing though is just be a good coach, and that has its own set of values. Another really interesting thing is that it's a normal transition when you move from one league to another, or whatever, that you and the other kids your age move away from that coach, and so there's a natural transition as opposed to another loss. That's a big thing, So what we have seen is our families don't really want multiple strangers or new people coming into their life that are leaving. And so when they have this activity and they have that coach or instructor and they might bond with them, then if they move on past that, it's not as harsh because it's a natural part of all these types of activities.
And I learned something because I interviewed Sarah Roberts on episode 34, and she's the widow of a Marine who took his own life. And she really gave me this gift of understanding that when a dad takes their life, or a mom, that anytime you're suicide involved, you think you're ending the pain, but really all you're doing is taking everything you feel inside and just passing it on. That you're giving them a burden that they, one, don't understand because they didn't understand the world that you lived in, but now they have to carry something on their heart that they're not prepared for, they don't understand, and they're always going to feel like they're missing something.
Yeah, definitely.
And it just continues to pass it on. And it's the opposite of legacy. It's giving someone, it's making someone's shoulders feel heavy for the rest of their life, even by a few pounds, whatever it is. They have to carry that load extra. And while in some cases, probably the one part that's it's maybe slightly positive towards it is the more pain you can walk through generally as a human being. And through this positively, you can get them through this pain. They'll generally do something even stronger on the other side. Like Oprah Winfrey's story of becoming a billionaire. She came from nothing in Missouri. And Tony Robbins is another simple example that all of those people have horrible stories of how they started their life. And now they're at the other side. And so if you're giving them that yellow brick road to get through this, but then take that pain and create something beautiful from it.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we've seen that's been really cool. We call it our Voices program, and it's for moms and kids that want to tell their story to help us help more kids. There's healing in talking about the story and honoring their loved one by doing so. But healing and helping, that is a big thing. And we actually had a little girl. This was last year, I guess. We were the charity for the Military Comptrollers Association in Denver, and there were 4,000 attendees. And this little girl, and her and her brother and her mom and I were there, and we were going to address the crowd and thank them at lunch. The mom and I were. And I think she was 10 at the time, and she said, I'd like to say something too. So, okay, absolutely, come on up. And she got to the microphone, 4,000 people. And public speaking is like one of the greatest fears for so many people.
Yeah, people fear public speaking over dying.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So she got up there and she started talking, and it was really neat because she said, I'm not even nervous, and everybody clapped for her. And she got emotional, and she pulled it back in. And it was such a sincere thank you. And you could see her standing up taller as she was doing this. And then afterwards, everybody was coming up to her and wanting to take pictures with her or talk to her. The Undersecretary of Defense for International Affairs was there, and she came up and gave her a challenge coin and told her if she ever needs a job in the government or wants one, that, to contact her. And man, it was a big transformation thing. But the most powerful thing for me was that was actually the anniversary of her dad's suicide. And on that day, she opened herself up, and they open their wounds when they do this. And she did that to help us help others. And it's so powerful.
That's the secret that most military dads completely overlook, and most human beings overlook this part in 2020 of the power of vulnerability. That it's this hidden secret that people think showing vulnerability, and even as leadership in business, people think, I can't be vulnerable. I can't really say how I'm feeling. Or I can't project that I don't have it all together, especially with like Instagram and perfect lives on Facebook. But man, when you share a raw story and be vulnerable, instead of people walking away, you actually, just what you just talked about, they actually come towards you.
Oh, yeah.
And I describe it as the world is waiting for people to go first, because there's a lot of pain that people aren't feeling. But man, when someone goes first, there is just a shockwave of pain and permission that people get to feel and just instantly start crying. I've told situations at conferences of not growing up with friends and not having friends for my adult life. And afterwards, a dad came up to me and was already in tears before he got to me. Like, I just telling a simple story about not having friends brought a dad to tears because I said words of feelings that he didn't know how to describe.
Yeah.
And that's what those voices are doing. There's so emotions can be so hard, especially if you're not used to feeling them or labeling them. And the moment you hear someone share a story that's even 10% similar, you just instantly resonate, and you just feel a weight lifted because your brain feels what it was unable to feel for so long.
You just hit on something that I hadn't really thought about, but it's important, and I'm glad. I think it'll be helpful for me and the organization going forward, is that vulnerability piece, that it draws people in. Because if she had not gotten up there and spoken, and she was instead standing by the table, nobody would have approached her because it's uncomfortable, and because it's a sad thing. So it's easier to avoid than it is to engage. But when she opened herself up, that connected with them at a different level. Sometimes it's harder for us to get attention or to stand out on Facebook, for example, because if it was a page about puppies, you get a whole lot more clicks and likes and so on. But it's a little bit tough. It's a tough subject, and who wants to think about the kids and how they're missing their loved one and how they're going to have to go through Christmas without them and those kinds of things. And so I think people look away, or they may not commit as much time to understand what's going on or what we're doing that's different. But it is the vulnerability piece that certainly and I've seen that when I'm speaking to somebody, that when they hear a story, the body language changes. They lean in, versus here's our mission, here's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the story, it's the connection, and the connection is through the loss, because everybody's had some loss, maybe not their parent, but they get it. And I think most people are compassionate and want to do something, but they're also going to avoid anything that's uncomfortable.
And courage isn't something that's a virtue that's practiced a lot. So when people show courage, it becomes a magnet of polarity for people to come towards it, because it's rare. And when people do it, especially with a story like that, it's beautiful. And it's just a good example of how pain spoken properly and your story told. Like, I mean, having your husband kill himself can be I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But at the same time, when you're on the other side of that, there's only one thing you can do with it, is try to bring something beautiful from that pain and try to help someone else through that pain. Of even with every podcast episode, the goal of every podcast is for a dad to share something vulnerable. And as long as they share something vulnerable, because there's a dad out there that has an echo chamber of thoughts that he's not saying, he's not speaking with them in words. So they become fact, and those facts become truths, and those truths convince them that he's better, his family is better without them. And it only takes one vulnerable thought, even if it's not that vulnerable. It just takes one thought that makes whatever he's hearing in his head sound crazy. And that can trigger him to take that step and be like, well, that was a crazy, stupid thought, because this guy over here had it, and my brain was telling me I was the only one feeling this way. Yeah. And especially with like wives that lose this stuff, when you share it, that all of those feelings of lonely cancel out, and you're like, my brain was wrong. There are people that are walking the same thing, and we can find community and love and just connection, and then feel connected again. Like, it doesn't, you just need to grow through that pain on the other side through love. I love it.
You know, we had a story, and this was one of the things that this really tore me up. And we had an Air Force family, Air Force Master Sergeant, and he was killed in a parachute training accident after multiple combat deployments in special operations. And he had 6 kids, and they were on our waiting list. And when we called, my wife called to say, hey, we can, get your 6 kids in activities now, which is always a positive call. The mom said, I only have 5 now. My 2-year-old Lila just drowned. And it absolutely crushed us. And what we had done, the first kids we ever supported, the 3 sons of the first chaplain to pass in combat since Vietnam, we did swimming lessons for them. In fact, this was the first family. It was while we were not a 501c3, and I just paid for it because I just had to get this going. But the youngest one was so little, we did mommy and me swim classes. And so anytime we had really young kids, we would always say, hey, let's get them in mommy and me swim classes. That's something they could do. And it didn't happen for Lila, and I couldn't fix it. And it was, it was a failure to grow the organization quick enough to get them off the waiting list quick enough. And I couldn't do anything about it. It was 13 months from when Dad died until Lila drowned. And now you've got this single mom going through that loss, that condensed, so that close together. And everything had to go wrong for this to happen. They had the gate, to protect the pool and all this kind of stuff. And it happened. And in addition to that, one of her brothers was murdered, and her other brother committed suicide. And there she is going through all this together. And I called her and said, I don't have the budget for this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I want to try to convince swimming centers to just give, kids of our fallen basic life safety swimming lessons. And I'd like to name this initiative after Lila. And it was powerful for her. And she talked about how they blow bubbles, and bubbles don't last long, but you still do it because it's so cool in that little bit of time that you get them. And so she talked about that, and she came up with the name Lessons from Lila. And so we did it. We started that program, and we contacted all the kids we supported and said, no matter what your thing is, stay in that. But if you don't know how to swim, let's get you in swimming lessons. And then we called all the kids on our waiting list and told them the same thing, and went through this process. And now we've gotten several hundred kids swimming lessons, even though we couldn't make the long commitment to them and get them in something. And the powerful piece, though, is that this mom completed a doctorate in clinical psychology and is now a grief expert that speaks and helps others heal. Mm-hmm. And so again, the power of making something good come from the loss, and using that, and the experiences that mom went through enable her to connect and help other people that are going through their own grief. And I think that for military families, military dads and those with PTSD, they've got that piece too. Again, yep. It's a difficult thing because they're in a very dark place, but if they can see the light and be the light for somebody else, that's incredibly healing and powerful for them, as well as the other people they interact with.
Yeah, and that's the nut that I try to crack in every episode, of just getting military dads to recognize of how much they leave on the table by just assuming they don't have the power to actually change their life within themselves already. Like it's the proverbial chicken or the egg. The dad's kind of coming out, and you got to either wake them up, or you got to hopefully get them before they fall asleep. And I love what the lessons from Lila. I remember hearing the story at MIC, And I mean, think of that legacy as there's a massive tragedy, and that family could have been one that was in the newspaper for completely falling apart and ending up in the prison system. But the exact opposite. There's an example of losing their sister that they have, the older kids have, of that memory, knowing that she's saving lives, that, well, death happened. It makes it easier to understand that that death now serves a purpose and actually enables other kids to never happen before. And I think that's what every person that has somehow connection to suicide, they all have kind of not a responsibility, but they have a story that could literally transform lives and save them. And it's something that I think like the movement of 22 doesn't do enough, is you can't really just save 22 people to stop the 22 veterans killing themselves by making people aware of it. You really need to find all 22 have something wrong with them. And it's one thing when I started this podcast, I feel for all 22, but I'm only focusing on one, the military dad. And it's my focus to go a mile deep instead of 2-inch deep, 22 times wide. And all of these stories have the ability to save the 22, but people that are on the other side of this pain, they need to speak. They need to go find people that are in that darkness. And there's a TED Talk from a friend, Andy Wines, that I watched this fall, and he tells it like there's veterans standing in a pit, and other veterans need to jump inside that pit with that veteran and be like, we're in here together. I'm not sure how the hell we're going to get out, but we're going to figure it out together, and we're going to get out. Like that's the kind of mindset that you need when you're a veteran for any of this stuff, that people are in pits, jump in there with them, figure out how to get them out. And if you have any similarity connection with them, that's how you're going to do it. You'll find a way together.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple random questions. How many kids are on backlog right now?
Over 500.
Over 500
kids. Yes.
And how long does the average waiting period take to get through that 500?
That's the whole thing. So a long time, because we make the long-term commitment to the kids. That means that we've got to be very careful when we bring one off the waiting list. On average, it's an 11-year commitment that we're making. So projecting how much we have in reserve and balancing that with knowing that these kids are at risk. So we don't want to wait and build up a war chest before we call the next one, build too much. So it's a difficult balance. It varies. So like, for example, we moved probably 30, maybe 40 kids off the waiting list last year. We'll do a little bit more this year because we're actually going to grow some, but it's a difficult thing because it's hard to project donations because I'm not selling a product anybody needs. This is all just based on the goodness of people's hearts. And unfortunately, I didn't know anybody with means. We didn't have a sugar daddy or anything like that when I started this. So it's been very grassroots. I appreciate this podcast opportunity because it will raise awareness for that piece. But like you mentioned, raising awareness doesn't solve the problem. It's action.
And action is inspired by vulnerability. If people need to go second to actually share their story or feel a connection to it, you and I have gone first. Other people have gone first, but those voices I think are so critical because that's just the magnet for compassion. And in your particular case, compassion will follow money. And I can't help but think that sometime in my future that I'll be able to write a big check and support a whole bunch of kids. I have a question. Out of 500 kids, how much money would it take to make all of those kids funded? What's that type of number?
That's a great question. It's about we're looking at $16,500 for a kid for 11 years, basically. So that times 500 is $8,250,000. It's a lot.
Someone out there listening needs to write an $8 million check to Angels of America's Fallen so that we can get all 500. Like that would just be the cat's ass for 2020.
And believe, and that would get them all the way through. I mean, I'm not talking about get them in next year. We budget $1,500 per child per year. And we have built pretty good relationships with the activity providers. In most cases, they will give us a discount or some will flat out sponsor the child, which helps us help more kids.
Mm-hmm. And they'll sponsor them through the life or just at this particular event, and maybe you would have to repay it again at the next thing they change.
Yeah, that's a thing. Generally, it's a sponsorship for this year or the season. And so next year is still up for grabs.
What's the single largest donation you've had?
$75,000. And it was a foundation, actually. Chick-fil-A. We were the Chick-fil-A True Inspiration Award winner, and it was a $75,000 check and go to the Chick-fil-A headquarters for their Founders Day thing. And that was really powerful. And that came down to, we were nominated by a Chick-fil-A operator and people voted for us through their app, and we won. They didn't have a national winner; they had just different regions, but we won for the Western region, and so that's our largest single one.
Assuming me and you were both still in business doing the same stuff, I can almost see like this podcast being a little bit like Tony Robbins' model, where he charges a lot of money to help people at his events, but he also feeds millions of people worldwide with food based on that profit. So I could easily see that at some point this business becomes a point where, as you fuel this business or as people buy products from this business, that then fuels nonprofits to help dads that didn't come home, then gift the kids of being able to live a fulfilling life still. Like I can,
Yes.
That's like a full circle for me. I can already visualize it. I can feel it in my heart and feel it in my bones. And the first check, I will definitely be giddy about when I've been able to write my first check.
Yeah. And it's building momentum too. It's something I hoped it would grow faster, but the reality is these things, they take time unless you have some magic connection or something happens. And that might happen tomorrow. I don't know. Somebody listening to this podcast might have the ability to make a significant change, but actually they do, because a little bit at this level still makes a significant difference to us, So, I don't, it'd be great if somebody could donate $8.5 million or whatever, but anything helps, especially if it's a little bit monthly, because that helps me stabilize my revenue and know how to project. Okay, we've got this much coming in monthly. We can count on this, and so then we can project that into when we can bring the next child off the waiting list.
There's a Christian radio station that I listen to, and they have 4 fundraisers a year on the radio because they're funded by listeners. And they have what they call Club 360, where it's $30 times 12, and they set it up on a payment. And then they just they keep promoting, like, if we get 5 people signing up for Club 360, then you're supporting $30 a month, and everybody can kind of afford $30 a month, and that's $1,200 a year, and that helps. You just paid for 1 year's subscription with that. So I don't know if you like the name Club 360, but that could be something marketing wise you start getting your new marketing person on.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. We need to have more individual donors, more individual monthly donors as that stable base. And that is certainly one of our areas that we're looking to improve in this year.
Because instead of the one person donating, that person that continues the funnel, that's the best way. Because then at least you can actually count that in the books. And
it's the backbone, And one of the things too, if the economy tanks, then the bigger businesses and the foundations, they won't be giving out as much. Whereas somebody that can give $30 a month or $5 a month, they probably won't cancel that. And if they lose their job, they may have to. But if things just get a little bit tighter, they can probably still, you can skip Starbucks once and you can make that happen. So so there's a lot of stability that comes from small individual donations versus, if you live on the big grants, you might die by the big grants as well.
Mm-hmm. And like, I can only attest like the magic of the universe, because I almost didn't stop by your booth, but I pre-stalked your booth while you weren't there that one night. And so I was like, I better stop back for these guys. And so I started with some fear and said hello. We had probably an hour conversation that I instantly connected with your brand. I'm like, man, what are the odds of trying to find someone that's like complete in the same circle as me? We had a conversation now. And my entire mindset of networking is I'm always one conversation away from something amazing. So like, we really have no idea what could happen tomorrow, because one person listening to this could completely change the world, or they know someone that can change the world. Or I mean, even if I think I'm up to like 1,200 Facebook friends. If every 1,200 Facebook friends donated $10, that would blow your mind.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would. Absolutely.
Like the power of the small little thing is something that people often forget now because everything is so big. But at the same time, a small little change, or even something as simple as a hello to people, can be the same thing that changes someone's world as much as $10 to you every month. Could completely change yours.
Yeah.
And there's the lives of some child out there that you'll never get to meet. And it's like those Christian shows trying to get you to send money for kids in Africa and low income places. Like you get these cards of people in the mail that you're helping and different things. Like this is in the same category, except these are the kids that we all support and we all talk about saving veterans. Well, this is at a different level, and it's an entirely different. It's like creating the next legacy of people that go out in the world to change it. Like it's an entirely different flavor of just supporting veterans, in my opinion.
It is. And these kids are awesome too. One of the things, we have an angel gala. It's actually was started by one of our widows who wanted to, again, help us help more kids. And she had the background to put on events like that. And we're going to have our 5th one this February 15th. But last year, that mother that I talked about, Alyssa, that lost her daughter Lila, she was our keynote speaker. And after she spoke, 4 of her 5 kids got up there and performed in the activities we've been supporting them in. The 2 boys did guitar. Guitar was one of the things their dad did, so it's a connection to him. They played individually and sang, and then the little girl did dance, and the other boy did jujitsu and threw his brother around on the floor. But it's so amazing because they were doing well and they were showing the impact the program has on them. So it's a confidence booster and builder for them. And it was a way that the donors and supporters could see the direct impact they were having. But in my mind, they were kind of changing the world because that guitar performance, when one of them had written his own song and he sang and performed his own song, and it moved people, it's powerful stuff. And then the one doing jujitsu, his mom was kind of nervous. She said, I don't know how this is going to go because he won't practice or he won't tell me what his plan is. And so we gave him a microphone so he could describe the different moves that he was going to do. And one of them, he said he was going to do a rear naked chokehold. And then he laughed because he said naked in front of the audience. And that got everybody, everybody connects with things like that. So there's power in just doing your thing, whatever that might be. And so for somebody out there listening, their thing might not be that they've got the money, but they might know somebody that does, or they might be in a location where they could do a small fundraiser or whatever. But yeah, there's big and little. I say that sometimes because even if we became a huge organization, and I hope we do, I think the mission absolutely deserves it. But if we became a big budget organization, I still think that there's so much power in the small donor, the small event, that should always be a piece of our pie. And because it's connecting with people more so than one person writes a big check
and giving the child a sense of purpose and identity and love. Like, to me, that's more important than the donation itself. Like, knowing that what they did, the little sacrifice that they did by going to these events that you were paying for, like giving them the re-confidence boost that this all mattered. Like, that's just as game changing. You actually inspired something there when you were talking about, have you ever seen the movie I Can Only Imagine?
Yes.
Oh, that movie is talking about song and like finding your pain and tapping into that pain and creating something beautiful. Like I love that. I've bawled my freaking eyes out in that movie. And
that was moving. Yeah.
And at the end, it really hit me that, like, if you think, I didn't really know at the time, but Amazing Grace was written by a slave on a slave ship in the worst conditions. And that song is revered and remembered for centuries later. Think of what beauty can come from this pain that people feel, like, if they really get the vehicle and the people believing them to make something grow from it. Man, it just gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Like, it could explode just like the song I Can Only Imagine. It and allowed people to feel feelings that only he could give them the gift of permission to feel them.
Mm-hmm. It was very powerful. And that movie, interesting. It showed the connection with his father and the gap, and the gap was healed even after all the ugliness. And that's another thing I think that we've kind of been trying to talk about a bit, is that, the dad had really blown it in a lot of ways, and he came around, and, some of that pain and passion is what his son turned that song into. And
if it wasn't for being his dad being a dick, he wouldn't have had the song.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So
then you look back and you're like, you find purpose even in the worst of tragedy, even though, like, whatever, the dad not coming home, whether it be suicide or died in battle or whatever, all of these things are going to shape their life, and they're going to do things that they would never been able to do without that pain in their heart. So it's all perspective, and that's what you're giving, that gift of perspective, belief, and I love it. So as we wrap up, because we could talk forever, I feel like, what's a parting piece of advice you want to leave dads out there? And I would maybe think about, if I could bias your answer, think about the dad that questions his impact on the family. What is your most common message that you want dads that are still here being dad to make sure that they come home?
Oh, wow. I think you're crucial. You're crucial to your kids. It's not, whether you recognize it or not, you've got an awful lot, and they're looking for it and they need it from you. There will be a hole in them if you aren't there for them. And you've mentioned this in some of your things. The biggest thing you can give them is time. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be the best at this. You don't have to be the most, it doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be a special skill or anything. Just be there and be with them. And they're looking up to you.
Yep. I love that. And I've always, even my very first cliches that I used to plug was always, kids spell love Time. And
Yes,
on the
that's what I was thinking.
shittiest of days as a dad, if you remember that one principle, you can create an amazing adult even if you don't know what you're doing. Because all they really want at the end of the day is your time.
And the time for giving them the time is now, right now.
Yep, right now. Not tomorrow. The best time to give your kids time wasn't 5 years ago. It's like right now. This is the only time you get, and tomorrow is going to be gone. And something that you could talk to them about today could completely change their world. And I'm always finding how crazy stupid the simple things are is the stuff they remember too. So it's always, it doesn't have to be hard, complicated, or expensive to really make a memory that they remember 10 years into the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the memories come from the weirdest things.
Well, Joe, if people would like to donate, where's the best place that they can go to help support the mission?
Yeah, our website. It's www.AOA for Angels of America's Fallen.org. And we have some of our family stories on there. There's plenty of information, including, information about the organization. All of our audited financials are on there, our tax filings, anything that you could want to know, or if you've got any additional questions, contact us at, there's a, contact us link on there. But through the website's the easiest way. Plenty of information if you want to research us. And I recommend people do research us and compare us to other, if you happen to be giving to other nonprofits, maybe do a little research. There's some great ones and some not so great ones. We're trying to be one of the great ones. So that's it. Angels of America, AOAFallen.org.
Awesome, Joe. Well, I really appreciate you taking this extended time with us today to tell us these stories and to tell your story as well. And I can't wait to keep growing our friendship, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's great speaking with you. You're easy to talk to. That stood out at the conference as well. So awesome. You got what do you call them? The your little sayings. And I think you said
colloyisms.
Yeah, colloyisms. Yeah, you're great with those. Awesome.
Yeah. My random. I just realized recently that I have more things to say than I have airtime. So just starting last Friday, I started now a Friday solo episode where I dump all my colloyisms on different short 5 to 10 minute topics of just something that's on my heart, my mind, and getting more out there in the universe.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm going to have to get those, and I'm going to have my sons listen to those as well.
There's a lot of good stuff. We're at 55 episodes, and now I've got at least 7 solo episodes that I've done. So there's some good stuff out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. And thank you for listening to today's show, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The lifeblood of any new podcast are the reviews. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it, and you will help us get the message out to even more military veteran dads. As John Maxwell says, if there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. Dads, it's time to come home.